Stay out of sight, freak. My parents left me a note. Then a lawyer knocked on my door. My parents left me a handwritten note that said, "Stay out of sight, freak." 3 days later, a lawyer knocked on my door. Everything I thought I knew about my life was wrong. My name is Owen, and I've spent most of my life being invisible by force. Not by choice, not by personality, by instruction. I was the child my parents kept in the back bedroom. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the beginning of something dark and clinical, the kind of story that ends with courtrooms and social workers and tearful interviews on the news. It wasn't exactly that. It was quieter than that. And in some ways, quieter is worse. My parents were not monsters in the obvious sense. They fed me. They kept the lights on. They enrolled me in school and packed my lunches and attended parent-teacher conferences when absolutely required. What they didn't do was love me. Not the way they loved my brother, Thomas. Thomas was everything I wasn't. Tall, easy, the kind of boy who moved through the world like it had been arranged specifically for his comfort. My parents watched him play baseball on Saturday mornings and cheered from the bleachers. They hung his report cards on the refrigerator. They took him to Disneyland for his 12th birthday. I was born with a facial hemangioma, a large port wine birthmark covering the left side of my face and jaw. It fades slightly with age. It never disappears. My parents had decided, sometime in my early childhood, that this made me a problem. Not their child. A problem. The note appeared on a Tuesday morning when I was 17. I came downstairs to find the kitchen empty, the car gone from the driveway, and a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table with my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. I opened it. "Owen, we've taken Thomas to visit colleges in California. We'll be back in 2 weeks. There's food in the freezer. Stay out of sight when the Hendersons come for dinner on Saturday. Don't embarrass us. Mom." And then, in my father's handwriting at the bottom, added like an afterthought, "Stay out of sight, freak." 5 words. I stood in that kitchen for a long time, holding that piece of paper. Then I folded it back up, put it in the pocket of my jeans, and went to school. I kept that note. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I already understood, somewhere deep down, that evidence matters. I survived the 2 weeks alone. I was 17, and I had been surviving things alone for most of my life, so the mechanics of it were not unfamiliar. What was different was the silence. Without Thomas filling the house with his presence and my parents orbiting around him, I could feel how much space there actually was. How much of the house I had never been allowed to occupy. I ate dinner at the kitchen table for the first time in years. Not at the small desk in my room, where I normally took my meals when guests were expected, or when my father was in a particular kind of mood. I sat at the kitchen table and ate, and looked out the window at the backyard, and thought, this is what normal feels like. It felt like something I had been cheated out of for a very long time. The lawyer knocked on the door on a Friday afternoon. His name was Gerald Marsh. He was in his late 60s, well-dressed, carrying a leather briefcase, and he looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize at first, an expression of careful, practiced kindness. "Is this the residence of Owen Calloway?" he asked. "I'm Owen," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "May I come in? I have some information that concerns you directly. It's rather significant." Gerald Marsh was the attorney for my maternal grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield. I had never met Eleanor Whitfield. I knew she existed in the abstract. My mother's mother, estranged from the family before I was born, never spoken about in any detail. When I had asked about her as a child, I was told she was difficult, and that the subject was closed. Eleanor Whitfield had died 11 days earlier, at the age of 81. She had been, Gerald Marsh explained, settling himself on the living room couch with his briefcase on his knees, a woman of considerable means. Real estate holdings across 3 states, a portfolio built over 50 years of careful investment, a house in Vermont that had been in the family for 4 generations. She had also, he continued, been following my life from a distance for 17 years. I stared at him. "Following my life," I repeated. "She hired a private investigator when you were born," he said simply. "She received reports, photographs. She was aware of your situation at home." "Then why didn't she—" "She tried," he said. "Several times. Your parents blocked all contact. She consulted attorneys about her options and was advised that without evidence of abuse meeting a specific legal threshold, her options were limited. He reached into his briefcase. She never stopped trying to find another way to reach you. In the end, this was the way she found. He placed a document on the coffee table. Eleanor Whitfield had left her entire estate to me. Every property, every account, every investment. The total value, Gerald Marsh said quietly, was just over $4 million. I want to tell you that I cried. That I had some cinematic moment of release right there in the living room. What actually happened was that I sat very still and looked at the document and thought about a woman I had never met, who had spent 17 years watching from a distance, unable to reach me, finding the only way left to say, I see you. You are worth something. You always were. The crying came later, alone in my room. The ugly, years-deep kind. There was also a letter. Handwritten, several pages, left specifically for me. I'm not going to share all of it. Some things are just mine. But I will tell you what she said at the end. I could not get to you while I was alive, Owen, and I am sorrier for that than I can express in any number of words. What was done to you was a cruelty dressed up as ordinary family life, and ordinary cruelty is the hardest kind to name, and the most damaging kind to survive. But I have watched you from a distance for 17 years, and I want you to know what I saw. A boy who kept going. Every single day, in a house that did not deserve you, you kept going. That is not nothing. That is everything. Use this money to go somewhere that sees you properly. Build something. Live loudly. You have earned every single inch of whatever comes next. I read that paragraph approximately 40 times over the following week. My parents came home from California on a Sunday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table, their kitchen table, the one I'd been eating at alone for 2 weeks, when they walked through the door. My mother saw me and did that thing she did. The slight tightening around her eyes that meant my presence was an inconvenience she was recalibrating around. My father didn't look at me at all. Thomas dropped his bag in the hallway and headed upstairs without a word. How was California? I said. My mother started unpacking groceries. Fine. I need to tell you something, I said. Something in my tone made her turn around. I told them about Gerald Marsh, about Eleanor, about the estate. I watched my mother's face go through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, and then something that looked almost like panic. That money belongs to this family, my father said. He had been quiet until that moment. Eleanor was your mother's mother, whatever she had. She left it to me, I said, specifically and legally to me. Gerald Marsh has already explained that it is not contestable. My father's jaw tightened. Owen! My mother started. I reached into my pocket and placed the note on the kitchen table between us. The one from 2 weeks ago. The one in my father's handwriting at the bottom. Stay out of sight, freak. My mother looked at it, then looked at me. I'm moving out, I said. I'm finishing my senior year at a school in Vermont, near grandmother's house. Gerald Marsh has already helped me arrange enrollment. You're 17, my father said. You can't just... Gerald Marsh has also helped me arrange emancipation, I said. Given the circumstances, it was straightforward. Neither of them said anything. I stood up from the kitchen table. I kept the note, I said. I've kept a lot of things. I want you to know that. Not as a threat, just... I want you to know that I paid attention, even when you wished I wasn't there. I went upstairs and finished packing the bag I had started 3 days earlier. Vermont was cold and quiet, and nothing like Chicago. I enrolled in a small school where nobody knew me. I lived in Eleanor's house, my house now, with its 4 generations of furniture and its bookshelves and its view of the mountains. I found Eleanor's photo albums, sat on the floor of her study for an entire afternoon going through them. Found a photograph of her as a young woman that made me catch my breath. The same bone structure as my mother, the same dark eyes, but an expression my mother's face had never once worn. Open, unguarded, like someone who had decided a long time ago to live without armor. I put that photograph on my desk. I went to college on a full scholarship, not because I needed it financially, but because I had worked for it and I wanted it to mean something earned. I studied architecture, graduated with honors, built a small firm in Burlington with 2 partners by the time I was 29. My birthmark is still there. It always will be. For most of my childhood, I understood it as the reason for everything. The reason I was kept out of sight. The reason I ate alone. The reason my father could write 5 words on a note and feel nothing. I don't understand it that way anymore. My birthmark is just part of my face. It is part of how people recognize me. Clients, colleagues, my wife, our daughter. My daughter, by the way, has her great-great-grandmother's eyes. I have Eleanor's photograph on my desk still. Sometimes my daughter picks it up and asks who it is. That's your great-great-grandmother, I tell her. She never got to meet you, but she made sure you'd have a father who was okay. Thomas called me once, about 3 years after I left. He was living in Seattle. He said he was sorry, not for anything specific, just in the general way people apologize when they know they were complicit in something by staying quiet. I said I appreciated it. We're not close. We're not enemies. We exist in the same world at a significant distance, and that feels like the right arrangement. My parents. I don't have a dramatic ending for that part of the story. We have not spoken since the kitchen. I don't wish them harm. I don't think about them often. I think about Eleanor. I think about a woman who couldn't reach me through all the ordinary channels, and so spent 17 years building the one bridge she knew would eventually get through. Money is not love, but sometimes it is the vehicle love uses when everything else is blocked. She saw me. That's the whole thing, really. She saw me, and she found a way to say so, and it was enough. It was more than enough. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been made to feel like you were too much, or not enough, or simply inconvenient, leave a comment below. You are not alone. Subscribe for a brand new story every single day. And remember, somewhere out there, someone sees exactly who you are. Don't give up before they find a way to reach you.